Hi, I'm Wayne Grabowski. I'd like to share with you how to prepare and use the Vuze underwater case for scuba diving. The structure of this is broken up into 3 parts. Basically, I have a 3-day schedule I follow. The first day is 2 days before the dive, where I prepare the cameras, charge the cameras. The next day is the day before the dive, where I actually prepare the case and prepare and load the case and test it. And then the third day is the day of the dive. I'll show you how I do the final setup and talk about what I do between dives, etc. So, I already finished my coffee, let's get to it. The Vuze cameras take a long time to charge and they tend to drain in storage. So I try to charge them up 2 days before I'm diving, because I'm usually too busy the day before and I just want to make sure I've got time to do it. So before I do that, I wanted to say this. I've had several buddies lose their cameras underwater. And I will talk at a couple of places about what you want to do so that you can get it back if yours disappears. Everybody gets these address labels in the mail from charities. So I've got a ton of these things, and I put them on everything. So I've got one on each of my Vuze cameras. I've actually got one, and I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but I've got one inside the case. A friend of mine recently found a camera on a dive. It had one of these address labels on it inside the underwater case, and he actually called them up and the owner got the camera back. So do that. The other idea is you can put a text file inside your SD card with your name and address on it. That's a wonderful idea. I've never gotten around to it. So charging. The Vuze camera, the original Vuze camera, is a little picky about charging procedure. The Vuze Plus, not so much. But I'm going to use the same procedure on both. The Vuze camera, it detects whether or not the USB cable has power applied to it when you plug it in. If it has power applied to it, it will only charge at like half an amp. If this is not plugged in before you put it in here, it can charge at about 2.1 amps. Now that makes a big difference in how long it's going to take to charge. So the recommendation is take your cable, your USB cable, plug it in. Okay, there, that's plugged in. I'll do the same for the Vuze Plus. You plug the USB cable without any power into the little micro impossible to hit thing. Then you plug it into the charger brick. Then you actually give it some electricity. And hopefully the little red lights have turned on. Okay, so they're charging. And that's going to take a couple hours, so I'm not going to sit here and film the whole thing. Okay, once you got the cameras charged, we got to deal with the case. So in my timeline, this is the day before the dive. I've already probably loaded up my gear in the back of my truck, and I do this kind of late in the day, actually. So I wanted to point out these little plastic protection sheets that come on the lenses. For lack of true lens covers, these are the best you got. I'll talk about other ways to cover the lenses on the day of the dive. But when you're handling the case, you want to leave these things in place. They actually come off and go back on pretty easily, and they stick. I'm not sure how long they'll stick, but I'm going to use them as long as I've got them. That's what it is. So let's open it up. I like to start on the bottom, you just grab the latch and pull. Then I flip it over, grab the latch and pull, and the two halves just slide apart. Now inside, you've got the camera mount, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I'm just going to set it aside for now. In the other half, the camera comes with these little desiccant packets. Digital cameras tend to heat up. If there's any moisture in the case, it'll it'll go out into the air within the case, and it will condense on any cold surfaces. Now that could be the housing itself or the lenses, and the lenses will fog up if it densifies there. So these little desiccants are provided to suck up that moisture so it doesn't fog up your lenses. Now I've got a little thermometer, indoor-outdoor thermometer that records relative humidity. I'll stick a picture of it in here. I actually got it for work. And what I've found is below about 40-45% relative humidity, I generally don't have a problem. I have had problems with other cameras above about 60% relative humidity. So, now, we don't get much humidity. You'll see when I show the picture, it's pretty low today. But if you're traveling, you're someplace like Florida or tropics where you get a lot of humidity, things you can do are, if you can crack the case open in a air-conditioned environment, that's the best, because the air conditioning takes the moisture out of the air and that'll dry it out. Other people have talked about, blowing clean dive air into the case. That's going to be tricky with this case because it's kind of tricky to put back together. But you could give it a try. You could even try opening and closing the case inside an air-conditioned vehicle. If you've got a van that you're diving from, that could work. That'll get you a low humidity. But push comes to shove, these are really good compared to the little paper tabs you use in GoPros. Now, mine's already mounted. They come with these little double-sided adhesive pads. You just stick one inside the case, and then you plop the desiccant pack on top of it. I don't know if you can see that. So there's that. All right, so the O-ring is what keeps your camera from turning into electronic rubbish. I don't lube it every time, but I inspect it every time. And so let's do that. So I've reached an age where a magnifying glass is very helpful. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to examine it very carefully and just have a look and wipe off any little bit of lint or anything that looks suspicious. Lint, hairs, cat hairs, sand, anything like that. You don't want that on your O-ring because it can compromise the seal. I've had a couple of GoPro floods. So if I'm not going to lube the O-ring, that's it. I just proceed to closing it up. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to go ahead and take the O-ring out and demonstrate lubing it. So the Vuze comes with this snazzy little pick. One thing that really helps in pulling the O-ring from the Vuze dive case is at the very bottom center of the slot, of the O-ring slot, there are a couple of notches. And these make it very easy to get the provided hook in and under and around the O-ring, making it very easy to pull out. Now obviously I don't want to look at it. Now once it's out, I wipe down the table, but so this is a scary thing. Unless you're living in a in a clean room, any place you're at is liable to have dust on it, so you just don't know. But so once you got the O-ring out, you want to go ahead and inspect the groove. Make sure that it's clean. Now if it isn't, what do? I have used Q-tips, but they can shed lint too, so you got to inspect pretty carefully. It's darned if you do, darned if you don't kind of situation. But this is clean. The camera comes with this little packet of Molykote 111. The problem is, this is a single-use packet. No practical way to close it after that. I guess you could use a clothespin or something. You know, there's a good chance of that getting all over the place. Since I started with Nikonos 5s, I got a huge stash of this Nikonos 5 O-ring grease. I did some Googling, and it's not clear that this stuff is necessarily the right compound. So I went ahead and ordered some Molykote 111 on Amazon. Now, I wasn't paying attention when I ordered it, and so instead of getting a little tiny tube like this that'll last you years, I got this monster tube of this stuff. So I've got a lifetime supply. Anybody wants to lube their O-rings, look me up. You can come over and use it. So the O-rings are going to move around in the slot. They're going to adapt to the pressure. They're going to adapt to any non-uniformities in how they get shoved in when we put it back together. And that's good. They have to do that to adapt to the pressure changes. Now, they have to be lubricated and pliable when they do that. Now, you don't want much grease on here. You don't want to see, when you're done, it just wants to be a nice uniform light sheen. You don't want to see streaks of lubricant or anything like that. So it's you know, you don't want much on it. So you just put a little tiny bit on your fingers and you rub it around. Take a quick look. I want to make sure that when I'm handling it, I'm not transferring lint and other stuff from my hands onto it. Next, you just put it back in the case. Alright, you just put it in the slot. The slot is an odd little shape. It's kind of a, I didn't know how to describe it. But you just slide it in and work your way around and get it fully seated into the case. And once it's as uniformly as you can, that's done. Now, you've done that, put it down, go wash your hands. You got grease on your fingers. If you start handling your cameras or anything else, you're going to get grease on that. I did that and I had fingerprints on my views for a while. So I'm going to step away and I'm going to wash my hands really good with soap and water. So you can just, my hands are clean. Let's get going. So I'm just going to set this aside here. Now we want to attach the base plate to one of the cameras. So let's do, just for grins, let's do the Vuze Plus. The procedure is exactly the same for either camera. So you flip the camera over. There's a serial number on the bottom of the camera. You want that to show through the smaller of the two holes in the base plate. So that would be this one, not the big one. I think the logo shows through the big one. I don't know. You just put it into the tripod slot. Get it started, line it up, and tighten her up. Don't need to break anything, you just don't want it to spin around. And yeah, the little Vuze logo is showing through the big hole, the serial number is showing through the small hole. Alright, once you've got the camera mounted on the base plate, before you shove it in, you should take a minute with one of these little microfiber cloths that come with it, and if necessary, wipe out, or take a good swab on the inside of the dome ports because you're not going to be able to get to them again. They should be fine, but who knows? Dust could fall in there. And then wipe down, take just a quick clean of all of the lenses on the Vuze camera. That done, you go ahead, you want to line up the switches on the camera itself and the switches on the case. You want to make sure that they line up, because if not, you're going to have to take it out and do it over again. You figure out how that's oriented, and then these little guides on the base plate have to engage with the guides on the bottom of the camera, or the bottom of the case. And that can be a little tricky to do, so you can just watch me fumble while I do it. All right, once you get it, you slide it in, and it goes in about halfway. You take the other half of the case, and you're doing the same thing. You're just lining up those guide slots. Once they get engaged, it slides together, and you can latch it shut. All right, so now the next thing is I'm going to go take it into the bathroom where I've got a bucket full of water. This is California, we got drought, so we keep buckets of water around. And I'm going to test it. Okay, so I've taken the little protective covers off of the lenses, because I don't know how they hold up in the water, and I'm going to just go ahead and dunk the camera in this bucket of water and go away for an hour. We'll go have some lunch. Okay. I'll finish my lunch. Let's take this thing out of the bucket and make sure it's dry. I'm not seeing any problems. So we're going to start drying it off, and we'll go back to the kitchen table and finish this up. All right, well, we're going to keep drying these things off. I'm using these blue shop towels you can get at a lot of hardware stores. They are not truly lint free, but they're pretty low lint, and they're pretty liquid proof. So assuming it's 100% dry, the next thing would be to put all the little protections back on the lenses. Again, I really wish we had decent lens caps available. Maybe somebody will 3D print something for us here. You probably don't need to have these on for transportation, but I'm going to be doing other things after we get to the dive site. So I just soon have these on and not have to remember to put them on later if I need them. So when this thing is all dry and protected, I'm going to put it back in the cloth case that comes with the Vuze case. All right. And then that's going to go into the Pelican case, and that is how I'm going to transport it to the dive site. Okay, nice and buttoned up safe. So I'm not actually diving today, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go get my truck set up. We'll go outside and I'll show you what I do on the day of the dive. All right, so obviously I'm not diving today, so I dive out of the back of my pickup. Normally the bed of the pickup would be full of dive gear, but I've just got the stuff that I need to demonstrate how I set up my camera. Before I go into those details, I want to point out a few things that are here. First off is this, they call them X tables. The tech divers use these a lot. I hope you can see them. They're portable. I carry it in my roof rack. I'm not sure they're sold anymore actually, so you might want to get something equivalent. But I use this for my views because my truck is usually full and I'm using my tailgate to get in and out of my dive gear. So I can use it to set up my camera and I can leave it alone, and that's all I use it for. Okay. The other thing I want to call your attention to here is I've got a bucket, not the same one as in the bathroom, and I've got this giant container of water. It's a gas container, but it says water all over it. And I'm gonna use this to rinse my camera after each dive. So I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can do this where you can see it. I'm gonna go ahead and fill this up with water. So if I do 2 dives, I'll rinse my camera, or I'll set my camera in here for the surface interval. Or if I just do the 1 dive, I'll set it inside here and rinse it off and then dry it before I head home. So that's just water. So let me reposition the cameras and then we'll talk about how I actually set up for the dive. So my dive setup with the Vuze camera is still in flux. For these first initial dives, I'm using this tripod, and I have more to say about that. But first I want to get the camera set up. Okay, I transported it to the dive site in the case. So I'm going to take it out of the case. I'm going to leave the protective covers on for now. And I need this float. With the camera in it, the dive housing is about £1 pound negative. Now on a tripod that's not necessarily bad, but that would tend to make the tripod top heavy. So I built this snazzy little float out of Divinycell 100 PVC. It's an incompressible PVC foam. I've used it in a number of other camera systems. It does not compress noticeably. I've had it down to like 80-90 feet and I've noticed no compression. So this one is designed to fit under the bottom. It just fits right over. It's got a slot for the latch. So I just slide it in there and then I screw on one of these handles. Now, so I've got the bottom handle attached. Now the top handle, if you think about it, the way this thing is designed, it's triangular section, so there's 2 halves. Now, what you want to do is you want to mount the handles both to the same half. So this handle is mounted to the half that doesn't have, in this case, that doesn't have the switches. So it's mounted to this half. So I want to mount the second handle onto the same half. Now the reason for that is, if you mount it on the other half and you handle it, especially if there's any force, what you're doing is you're applying a force to 2 different sides of the case, and that could compromise the seal. It's a very small chance, but why take any chance? Okay? So, and now I want to start setting it up for the tripod. Let's see, first off, I want to look for the side that has the battery access. The battery access side, it's considered the back of the camera, but what I found is that stitching software will tend, when you stitch it up, it'll tend to put the battery side, or the access panel side of the camera into the main field of focus in the stitch. So 3D Combine does that, AVP does that. I don't know about the HE software, but it may. So anyway, as far as I'm concerned, that's the front of the camera. And so I'm going to set up my tripod so that that's in front. Now that's the way it's set up. It's on the other side from the Vuze lettering. So I'm going to set up my tripod with that in mind. So this is the effective front. I'm going to set up my tripod attached that way. So I'm just attaching the quick attach to my tripod here. The other thing is, if you notice these handles, they're set up with this top surface is kind of a triangular shape. And what that does is it puts the tripod hole over the center line of the case. So you want to mount it accordingly so that the tripod hole is that way. You mount it via that thing and everything's going to be symmetric and balanced. I've got the float attached. I've got the handles attached. Now we're going to go ahead and mount this on the tripod itself. Again, the effective shooting front is opposite that. So I'm going to put my tripod handle toward the effective back. There. Now that's all attached. Okay. So we were talking about people losing cameras. Well, now it's time to deal with that. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to have some kind of a safety lanyard attached to all of my gear, just attaching it to my other gear. So I've got this, little lanyard here. I don't know if you can see that. I'll point it out. I use that on my wrist. But the other thing I use is I got this big spool, this old spool of fishing line. I believe this was like 50-pound test. And I use this as much as possible just to attach one thing to the next. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just run a section of this line from the housing somewhere to the tripod. So I'm just looking for somewhere where I can shove it. There's a hole. So, and I just use a standard kind of fishing knot. Just loop it through the same way, like 5 or 6 times. Now, eventually I'm going to go to probably some kind of a selfie pole or a floating stick, kind of like the virtual setup. But I do the same thing. You just want, if something gives up the ghost, you want to at least have one backup so you don't lose it. So I got about 5 or 6 turns there. And then I go down here on the tripod somewhere and I find a hole and I shove it through. There, and then again, just a simple fisherman's knot. Just loop it through about 5 or 6 or 7 times. It doesn't have to be pretty. You're going to cut it as soon as you come out of the water. Anyway, so it doesn't have to last. It's just got to last long enough that if things get loose, you can get a hold of your camera and you have it to bring home. Because otherwise, then you're just relying on those address labels for it to find its way home to you, and that's no fun at all. I've found a couple of my cameras just dangling from the end of this stuff. So it's good. Now, the other thing is, trim these ends pretty close. I had 2 floods in my GoPro housings because the ends of one of these lanyards was getting into the case, and because I was closing the case without my glasses on, I didn't see it. This is going to be pretty top heavy. I know the top is out of your field of view, but what I do is I just wrap a 2-pound ankle weight around these cross pieces. There, you set it down underwater. Its bottom, the center of mass is low. You can extend the legs to 1 height, 2 height, and it's real stable. It doesn't wash over. I forgot, at this point, I would take off all these little protective covers and I would stash them away somewhere, and they're going to stay put away until I'm done with my day of diving, and actually probably until I get home and start putting my gear together. So that means you need to have something to protect the lenses. at least until you get into the water, if not further. Okay, so the first thing I tried was one of these Carhartt beanies, because I figured when I wasn't covering my camera I could use it for my head. So it just goes over, it's very soft, and you can just set the camera up on that, and if it falls off, it's going to provide some protection. A Facebook friend who also has one of these cameras, she recommended this neoprene lunch bag, and this is really cool. It's got handles. She actually takes it and clips it off to her gear, so she'll actually take it into the water. But this, again, it just fits right over. It fits very nicely. It's waterproof, and because it's neoprene, it's going to actually provide more protection for the housing than the Carhartt. A third option, suggested by another Facebook friend, is to get a little baby hat, a little baby cap that has a chin strap. It's beautiful, and it fits over there nicely, and you can tie it on. So that's really secure. That's really a really good suggestion, really cute. I didn't pick one up for this video. The camera's set up. At this point, I would get my gear set up and take it diving. When I'm done diving, I bring it back from the dive. I set the tripod down like this for a few minutes. I get my tanks off, I get my weight belts off, all of that. And then take a knife or my shears or something. I cut the safety lanyard that I just tied up for you. I take the camera off and I dump it in the water. Now I've still got my safety covers on. But anyway, so it sits in the water during the surface interval, at least until I'm ready. And then during the surface interval, if I'm going to do 2 dives, I take it out, I dry it off, and then on the little table that I've got, I'll go ahead and as carefully as can be, I open it up, I inspect the O-rings, I swap my one views for the other. I just swap in the other views because neither camera really has enough juice for 2 dives. And I take a good look at the O-ring, I seal it back up just like I showed you, attach it here, tie it on with a new little length of fishing line, go diving, come back, dump it in the water, and then when it's all done, when I'm all done with the day of diving, I'll take it out, I'll dump the water out, I'll take the camera out, and I'll stick it into whatever camera case I'm carrying it in, or safety I'm wrapping it in. I'll stick it in the empty bucket, and that's what I transport it home in, because it's not real dry at that point. And when I'm home, I'll let it dry out, I'll take it out, I'll transfer the files, and I'll spend the next 2 weeks stitching. I think that's everything I wanted to show you. None of it's really complicated. I hope there's some useful tips in there, and thank you for your attention.